What it do, comic babies? I'm Bunkmaster B, and today we're talking about something a little bit special. About a month or so ago, I was on the Hangout stream that BJ Kicks of Comics Are Dope fame hosts every Thursday, or at least the Thursdays he's around. And someone jumped on there and said, "Kicks, are you going to do the 5 comic challenge?" And apparently that is making a video about the 5 most important comics in your collection. I have since looked online. I don't think this is actually a thing. If it is, it was one of those, like, it happened for a hot second and then no one ever thought about it again. Looking at you, Ice Bucket Challenge, although you did raise a bunch of money for ALS, so hey, awesome for you. But either way, I was like, that's a really cool idea. And it gives me a time to talk about the stuff I really like, which is kind of what this whole channel is about, is just me talking about things I like. So what better way to do that than talk about the 5 most important comics in my collection? And I think part of the whole idea behind this collection is you can take that in any direction that you want. You know, if you're a big key collector, you can talk about, you know, kind of the 5 biggest keys that you have. You know, the biggest issues, the most important first appearances, or, you know, the ones that you're sort of proudest to have. So when someone's looking at your collection, you're like, oh, check this out. I've got this, I've got that. It can be the ones that are worth the most. That's typically going to be the same thing as the keys, but, you know, something you're like, oh, look at this. I have this, and I got this for something like that. For me, it's simply what 5 comics mean the most to me personally. You know, the kind of, in the case of a fire, assuming my family, my dog, everyone's outside, what comics am I running back in to save? And that's probably the most morbid way that I can explain this. So I want to talk about the 5 most important comics, at least to me, in my collection. Let's check them out. So we're starting with what is probably the single most important comic in my collection. And that is right here, my signed and remarked issue of The Question #1. This was signed by Dennis Cowan, and obviously there's an awesome Question sketch on there. The Question is my favorite comic series of all time. It has a really, really special place in my heart. Not only do I love this series, but this was really kind of the first comic series that I ever hunted down. This was, you know, sort of my introduction to really going from a comic reader to a comic collector. So I remember back in when I was an undergrad in college, I was on the GameFAQs message boards, comics and graphic novels boards a lot, and that was kind of how I would I would find out about a lot of kind of classic stories. Like there wasn't really a YouTube at that point. YouTube existed, but this was super early days YouTube. No one was really kind of making the kind of videos like you would see on Near Mint Condition or Comics Are Dope, or really any kind of videos like that. Like there were a few things here and there that kind of highlighted weekly releases, but that was it. Super early. And so the message board was the way that I really found out about, you know, kind of comics history and sort of like that's where I cut my teeth in the hobby. And one of the series that I would hear here and there that people would suggest was this series called The Question. Now, this was back in the era, again, where trade paperbacks weren't a thing that happened all the time. If you wanted to read a story, you had to find the actual issues. And so that's what I did all over the country. Anytime I would hit a comic shop, I would look through the back issue bins and I would pull a Question here and, you know, whatever things would be there. And that was really where I completed my collection, was just making it all together. And it was just such a cool hunt for that. And on top of that, it's just an amazing story. Denny O'Neil writing a character that really meant a lot to him from the old Charlton comic days where he was an editor. Bringing in Dennis Cowan, and, you know, whose just artwork is amazing on this one. And it's been my favorite series for a really, really long time. And I got to meet Dennis Cowan, and I have to tell you, he was the coolest, best guy I ever met. I mean, I unfortunately never got the chance to meet Denny O'Neil. He passed a few years ago, and so I won't have it there. But this right here, my favorite comic with some actual art on it by an amazing legend of the industry. This is my most important comic. Next up might be something that a lot of people here kind of expected would have been the most important comic in my collection, a Power Rangers book. And you didn't have to wait long to get that. This is right here, issue number 1 of the Boom Studios relaunch that is still to this day my favorite comic team book. Over any kind of Justice League or Avengers, the Boom Studios Power Rangers series, started by Kyle Higgins, continued by Marguerite Bennett, Ryan Parrott, and being written now by Melissa Flores. I love this series. I discovered this series during the early days of the pandemic. I had just moved to a new city. I had just found a new comic shop, and really, right after finding that, found out that everything was getting shut down. And right before, on literally the last day they were, allowed to be open, they had this big trade sale where they had a whole bunch of different random trades on sale for $1 each. And I had just moved here. I was only just starting to get back into physical comics at this point, after being mostly out of the hobby and a digital reader for a while. And I happened to grab a copy of the trade paperback of Power Rangers. I think it was volume 6. And it was one of those, it's $1. I'm sure I will be entertained by a Power Rangers comic, because how good could it be? Turned out it was incredible. Love the series. This is issue 1. And the reason that this is the most important one for me is, if you can't tell, it's signed there by the late, great Jason David Frank, who was one of my childhood heroes. I loved this show as a kid, and Jason David Frank played Tommy Oliver, who was the greatest Ranger. Whenever we would play Power Rangers as kids, everyone would fight over who got to be Tommy. And, that was always the first fight. And just absolutely love him. You can see on the back, so in case you're wondering. There's a COA right there. And unfortunately, I never got to meet him. I was actually supposed to meet him at GalaxyCon this past year. And unfortunately, like 2 weeks before that was scheduled to happen, Jason David Frank died by suicide. And it was pretty crushing. And this this comic I had purchased actually about a month before I was doing that. I was in a Whatnot, and I had just asked, it was Hypno Comics, and I had asked, do you have any Power Rangers variants? Because that was kind of my thing at that point. And they said, well, we don't have any variants of the new series, but here's what we do have. And they pulled this out. He had done a signing there, and they had a few extras left over. And, I knew I was going to go see him. And I was like, I asked for the Power Rangers. I'll bid on it. I ended up getting it. And of course, I was like, it's silly. Like, I'm going to meet him. I'm going to be able to get a signature on whatever I want. I didn't need that. And lo and behold, this is the only way I'll end up getting his signature. So this is pretty special to me. So on the list. Next up, this is the Kaiju Score, written by James Patrick, art by Rembrew. If you have been watching all of my old videos, first off, I'm so sorry. There's a lot of terrible quality videos on there. If I knew how to take them down, I probably would. But one of the first videos I made was basically adapting an article I wrote on Comics Are Dope about this particular series. And, James Patrick, I tweeted, I tweeted it out. I tagged Aftershock and James Patrick, and he had like the nicest reaction that could be. He retweeted it. He was like, I'm so happy that someone gets what I was doing. And it was just such this good feeling. And he was like, hey, if you ever want to talk more about it, reach out. And so, I ended up getting to interview him through email. Unfortunately, our schedules didn't line up ahead of the release of Steal from the Gods. But I am getting to put that out. And there was a cool interview that I'm still pretty proud of on Comics Are Dope about with James Patrick there. But really what this book represents to me is sort of the first time that any kind of internet presence that I had, or any type of internet presence, I guess is really it. This is the book that kind of represents that, where something that I made comic related got noticed by someone who, made a thing and liked what I said. And that was such a cool feeling. And on top of that, as you can see right there, I ended up meeting James, or Jim, as he told me to call him, and ended up getting him signed. So this, I love this story. I can't wait for this to continue. I've made multiple videos about this. Steal from the Gods was my favorite book last year. I can't wait to see where they go for this, but this is the book that started Bunkmaster B's online presence. Next up is the book that really sort of got me into comics in the first place. So I grew up in a super, super small town. And of course, before I jump any further, this is Green Lantern by Jeff Johns. This is the Omnibus Volume 1. Really, though, the book that I'm talking about here is the Green Lantern Rebirth miniseries. So I grew up in a super, super small town. I like to have rural lofts, but the quickest version I can kind of explain where I came from is I grew up on a dirt road where my town had the only stoplight in the entire county. So I didn't grow up in a place that had comics. There weren't comic shops around. Neither of my parents were comic readers. Comics didn't exist where I lived. Occasionally, the local drugstore would get in a random issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Ghostbusters or Archie or something little like that. But really, there was no kind of consistency. I could never follow it. And as a kid, I loved Batman the Animated Series, X-Men the Animated Series, and that was sort of how I interacted with comic books, outside of, again, those random issues that would just randomly show up, or the old X-Men Pizza Hut comic that I had one of and I read until it came off of the staples. Comics didn't exist. And it wasn't until I was in high school and I got my own car that I was able to actually drive about an hour away to an actual comic book shop. And I was just, like everybody in that first comic experience, you don't know what to buy. And so you just kind of grab whatever's there. And I was a big fan of the Justice League cartoon at that point. My favorite character on it was Green Lantern. And I knew that I liked him, so I grabbed the Green Lantern book that was going on. And that was Green Lantern Rebirth by Jeff Johns. But not Green Lantern Rebirth #1. No. That'd be way too easy. No, I grabbed Green Lantern Rebirth #4. So I had no idea what was going on, because this was halfway into this miniseries. And this miniseries that was about a character I'd never heard of. John Stewart was the Green Lantern I knew. I had no idea who this Hal Lantern guy or Hal Jordan guy was, or really any of these other characters. But this book was amazing. Even jumping in at 4 and seeing, just this going on. Ethan Van Sciver, say what you will about the guy, and I'm not going to say anything. but his art was amazing, and just this awesome scene with Green Arrow and Sinestro. I mean, this was incredible, and I didn't really care that I didn't know what happened there. You know, I had found comics on a regular basis, and I was going to be damned if I was going to give them up. And so this is what started me with a pull list, and this is what started my reading and following comics. And this was the book that got me my very first pull list. And I am into comics because of this book. So, Green Lantern by Jeff Johns, and specifically Green Lantern Rebirth, will always have an amazing place in my heart. And last, but certainly not least, is the comic that I think of as my first comic ever. So as I just said, it's not technically the first comic, since I had these random issues of Ghostbusters or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles along the way. But the very first comic that I remember and read so many times was Captain America by Mark Waid, number 8. This cover. So this was not one that I could get anywhere close to me. This was one I remember visiting my grandmother. My grandmother lived in a bigger town than we did. So, you know, they had a Walmart, and they had this little bookstore called Mr. Paperback. And I was always super excited to go there because they had a tiny little comic book collection. And I remember picking up, you know, I could only have one. And I had decided that Captain America was my favorite hero at this point. No idea why. He didn't have a cartoon show. But he was the one that I decided. And I'm really glad I did, because knowing now what I know about that era and grabbing this Mark Waid issue was absolutely the right choice. So I know it's not technically my first comic ever, because again, it would have been some random Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Ghostbusters or some kind of comic that I don't remember at all. But as far as comics that I can remember, that's this one right here. And you might be able to see right there, Mark Waid actually autographed it. And when I brought this to him, he was getting ready to autograph it. And, you know, this is the omnibus, as you can see. And he was getting ready to autograph it here on this, the blue end paper, which is totally the right place to do it. And I was like, actually, would you mind doing it here? And I had him, and he's like, really? Because I can do it there. I was like, no, that's the one that would mean a lot to me. He was like, sure, okay. And again, much like my Green Lantern Rebirth number 4 being my starting, this was a part of a crossover that was happening across multiple titles. And I still to this day have not read the rest of the Live, Cree, or Die. And going back and reading this now, this is a super dark story. It starts off, as you can probably guess there, making an allusion to the Holocaust. The Kree come to Earth, and basically they're doing a little ethnic cleansing. And Cap comes in and is saving everything. And then there's this story with Warbird where her powers are on the fritz, and she's trying to prove to Cap that they're not. So she doesn't call the rest of the Avengers, and then she ends up getting captured. And this is the part right here I will always remember. She gets captured, and she is in this area that the Kree are being gassing these people. Super dark. This should not have been a kid's first comic, but I mean, you look at that, you see Cap busting through the wall there. You see him getting her out. You see him freeing the people. him going against them, just like this was such an amazing moment. And again, it just shows why Captain America is the hero that he is. It's fighting for other people that he draws strength. This guy right here, this is more, he's more powerful than him, but it doesn't matter. Cap's fighting for a cause that he needs. And then at the end of it, Warbird ends up, getting captured, and, Cap doesn't leave soldiers behind. Her story continues in Quicksilver number 10. And then check out Avengers number 7 to see the rest of it. It's like, what? I never read any of those. So I have no idea what happens after it. But this right here, this was my first comic. And to this day, one of my favorites. So that was it, guys. That was my 5 most important comics. Some of those you probably guessed going into it that they were going to show up in some kind of form. I mean, if Bunk Bingo was a thing at this point, like, all my videos, you're all checking them off. If you're playing a bunk drinking game, if you're into that, again, you're drinking whatever substance it is that you're doing there. But this is, these are books that are important to me for one reason or other. And, I hope I kind of got that across. But I want to hear from you guys. Again, I don't think this 5 comic challenge is a thing, or if it is, I super missed the boat. But what 5 comics would show up on your list? Make a video about it and tag me in it. Or, just in the comments down below, tell me what are your 5 most important comics in your collection, however you define that. But hey, that's it for me today. I've been Bunkmaster B. You all have been amazing. Catch you next time.